Hello, my fellow Steamies. Well, this is it, the review of Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I want to make a few things clear going forward. I know the fandom has a lot of strong feelings towards this movie, but I don't like arguments on my channel, so comments will be disabled for this review. As I have a lot to say on our Little Engine's first big screen adventure, I decided to break it down into the following categories: plot, voice cast, live action actors, set design, music, direction. I will only be reviewing the theatrical cut of this movie, as it's the only one I have on DVD in the UK. I know about the director's cut, I've seen the leaked footage like everyone else has, but going down that rabbit hole of the coulda woulda shoulda, it's just not my thing for this. I in no way speak for other members of the Thomas fan community. These are my own opinions, and you will not agree with some of them. If I have any negative things to say about this movie, it is not an attack on any of the actors, Brett Allcroft, or anyone involved with the production of this movie. I have the utmost respect for anyone who works in the entertainment industry, especially those who clearly worked extremely hard to bring this movie to life for us all to dissect for so many years. So let's dive in to my review of Thomas and the Magic Railroad. The fandom know the plot of this movie inside out, but for any casual viewers of this episode, here's a brief synopsis taken from imdb.com. Thomas the Tank Engine's feature film debut follows Thomas and Mr. Conductor as they cross between the real world and the fictional island of Sodor in an attempt to recover the lost gold dust. It's safe to say that there is a lot more to this story than what is covered in these two sentences. The plot becomes so convoluted, your brain goes into meltdown at a certain point in the movie. But what point in the movie does this happen? As I rewatched the movie for this review, at the start, I really enjoyed it. The opening scenes in Sodor were beautiful. The interaction between Thomas and Gordon at the start, along with the introduction of Diesel 10, was brilliant. It was a great setup to the movie and really piqued your interest going forward. While 13-year-old me freaked out at the movie going into the other universe, as Mr. Conductor called it, as I was aware of what was coming this time, it wasn't that jarring for me. I've now seen Shining Time Station, and it really reflected the spirit of the show while injecting a sense of vibrancy that children who watched Shining Time as a child would have appreciated. You could tell Shining Time was the main push with the movie because there was just that little bit of extra sparkle, pardon the pun, with everything they did in those initial scenes. Having the likes of Alec Baldwin, who was involved with Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends in America at the time, Mara Wilson, who is one of the best child actors of the 20th century, and unsung heroes such as Grease talent and Shining Time Station icon Didi Conn gave the movie a sense of gravitas. It even had legendary actor Peter Bloody Fonda involved. It's clear that Brett Allcroft wasn't pulling any punches and trying to make this movie a success, and everything was going well. The movie had the right balance between the real world and the island of Sodor, with more focus on Sodor at this point, and the plot was straightforward enough. Diesel 10 wanted to scrap an engine called Lady, but Lady was in the real world with Burnett Stone, and Mr. Conductor was having a problem with his gold dust. At this point in the movie, I started thinking, maybe I judged this movie too harshly when I was 13. The energy was high, the story was engaging, and I was enjoying myself. So when did it start to become convoluted? In my opinion, it was with the introduction of Lily. I think Mara Wilson is amazing. She speaks very fondly of her time on Thomas and the Magic Railroad. However, her character was completely unnecessary. You could have had the character of Patch do everything Lily wound up doing, and it would have been fine. Patch got the raw end of the deal in my opinion. He was already established by this point in the movie, had a father-son-like dynamic with Burnett Stone, and knew all about the Shining Time crew. But the second Lily entered the equation, his character was shunted, again pardon the pun, and his potential was squandered. Burnett didn't need to have a family angle added to his story. Having him be a lonely man tasked with guarding his lady out of guilt for the past, and the only person he trusts, aka Patch, being the child to help reignite the lost engine and bring her back to Sodor, would have been a more satisfying story in my opinion. Even during the chase scene, keeping that scene the same, but having it be Burnett Stone and Patch, and Burnett Stone is knocked off the lady during the chase, and with all resting on Patch, he saves the day. That would have felt more impactful, in my opinion. To me, it felt like they only hired Mara Wilson for her fame in Matilda and Mrs. Doubtfire, as a way to get younger audiences who weren't fans of Thomas in theatres. That's not the case, but it is how it felt to me. It's not fair to put all of the blame on Lily though. She was a catalyst for the real world arc starting to go south, but on the Sodor front, It started to bomb right about the time that rabbit left a note for Mr. Conductor. I held on before that as there was enough intrigue to keep me engaged, but having a rabbit leave a handwritten note for Mr. Conductor telling him to eat carrots to help him think, then having that really weird rhyming memory incident, that was when my attention went from 100% to roughly 50%. Then after that you start spending less time on Sodor and more time in the real world, which made it harder to concentrate, and my attention span dropped even further. The chase scene at the end with Thomas, Lady and Diesel 10, however, was extremely entertaining and brought you back into it, but by that point, ironically, the train had already left the station in terms of understanding, and you just zone back out again after Diesel 10 falls off the viaduct. I'm not saying things that haven't already been said by many other reviewers in the past, but the fact that the notes that I made while watching the movie dropped dramatically after the Tidmouth Shed Diesel 10 scene shows that they are slightly justified. One final point I would say is that you could have cut Junior out of the movie entirely as well. Like Lily, he was a pointless character that added more confusion to the plot, in my opinion. Again, it was a needless angle for Mr. Conductor to have a cousin who's a screw-up, but learns the error of his ways. If you just had Mr. Conductor trying to cope on Sodor without his powers, and using the last of his gold dust to get back to Shining Time, running into Patch, and together they go and get Burnett Stone and ignite Lily as mentioned above, would have been much simpler. 2 needless characters removed, and a tidier plot. 13-year-old me was wrong to outright slate the plot of this movie, because there were some real diamonds in the rough, but it's not perfect. At this point in the franchise's history, there had never been actors providing voices for the individual engines. In the TV series, the narrator voiced the engines, much like a parent would when reading the books to their children. However, to make it less confusing for general moviegoers, and with more money at their disposal, it did make sense to hire voiceover artists. I feel like voiceover work is very underappreciated in the entertainment industry. As someone who uses his voice for a living, you have to be very careful how you regulate it to avoid causing permanent damage. When a voiceover artist gets an audition, you still have to do the same amount of character work, research and development that you would for any other role. Children's media adds more pressure because you know that you have an army of fans who will jump on any traits that they see as wrong in their minds. The phrase, "that's not how I imagined they would talk," is used quite often. 13-year-old me was surprised by the use of a voice cast because, as stated previously, there had never been one. In the UK dubs, which was all I was aware of as a 13-year-old, Ringo Starr made attempts to give the engines individual characteristics, but in my opinion, Michael Angelis was better at character work in the classic series. My 13-year-old brain assumed that Angelis would voice the main cast of engines, and maybe newcomers like Diesel 10, Splodge and Lady would be voiced by other actors. That wasn't the case, and while 13-year-old me didn't necessarily mind it, I was thrown by it. This is where I would say I've had the biggest 180 in my opinion of my past self. I love the voice cast in this movie. This cast, bar 1 or 2, which I'll get into later, are the definitive voice cast for the Steam team, aside from Edward since he was nowhere to be found. My own particular favourites are Edward Glenn as Thomas, Colm Feore as Toby, and Neil Crone as Diesel 10. There was so much energy and passion in these performances. It was clear a lot of work had been done on developing how the engines spoke, as I'm sure there was with the rest of the engines. As Diesel 10 was a new character, I didn't have anything else to go on, but even as a teenager, I remember Crone's Diesel 10 more fondly than his Gordon. His Gordon is good, don't get me wrong, but you could tell Diesel 10 was his favourite character to voice. You could pick up a dialogue that was clearly improvised during filming, but it worked so well because Crone knew Diesel 10 inside out. Actors love to play a bad guy, because they have more layers of a character to explore, and you get more freedom to experiment with those layers. Diesel 10 was an ideal character to work on for Crone. There was no prior template that had to be followed. Nothing from the books, nothing from the TV series. All the other engines, bar Splodge and Lady, had been voiced in some form by narrators of the TV series, and there was tons of material out there that would tear the actors apart if they didn't live up to expectation. Crone put his own stamp on this character without any fear of judgment, and it shines through in his performance. I thought that Kevin Frank and Linda Ballantyne as Henry and Percy respectively were very good as well, although I felt bad for Frank as, like Fior, he didn't have much to say. The difference between Frank and Fior was that Fior sounded like he was having a blast voicing Toby, where Frank's acting, in my opinion, came across like he was expecting a bigger part and got shafted as a result. But Frank, however, also voiced Harold in this movie, and that was fantastic. I personally feel Frank put more energy into Harold in that one scene than he did for the entire run of Henry in this movie. I know Henry was meant to be ill in the movie, so it was probably more of a character choice than a case of ego. Splatter and Dodge were on point for the type of characters they were meant to be in the movie, and Diesel 10 called them Splodge in the movie as a running gag, but it might have been an inside joke because they were so generic that they could have easily just been one character and no one would have noticed. It's quite funny how Diesel 10 was the first person to do the amalgamating of names before it became cool, aka Shamey. James, in my opinion, was the most miscast voice actor in this movie. Susan Perman did a fine job. Being thrown in at the last minute because test audience didn't like Michael Angelis' interpretation on the character he had voiced for 3 series at this point does put a bit of pressure on you. But if I was Britt Allcroft back then, I would have put my foot down on that point and kept Angelus. His voice work is so synonymous with James that whenever anyone tries to do an interpretation of the character in fan media, myself included, they default to Angelis' body of work. Even in later iterations of James in the TV series, had nods to Angelis. Out of all the voices Angelis did in the show, and there were a lot, James is the one remembered most fondly by fans. And it's proof that sometimes test audiences aren't the best reviewers to go by when you know a character like James inside out. I do feel bad for Perman as she gets a lot of unjust criticism for her work as James in this movie, but she was doing her job, and to her credit, she did it very well. Finally, we come to Lady, voiced by Britt Allcroft herself. Lady had about 3 lines in the whole movie, but Miss Allcroft did a great job with those lines. I really like Miss Allcroft's voice, as it's the type of voice you could listen to for hours and never tire of hearing. A classic English accent that is soothing, comforting, and I really wish that she voiced more characters in the series from that point. When I started to review the live action actors, I really had to step away from the mindset of my 13-year-old self. As I mentioned in part 1, I had no idea what Shining Time Station was back then, so I had no idea live action characters had any involvement with Thomas the Tank Engine. So seeing actors like Alec Baldwin and Mara Wilson again threw me for a loop. Now I know about Shining Time and certain actors' involvement with the series at this point, I feel like I can make a much fairer assessment of the performances. I'm not going to go into why they had these characters in the movie in the first place. They were there for a reason, even if I can't see it. So this is purely based on their abilities on screen. And we'll start with Mr. Conductor himself, Alec Baldwin. I've been a fan of this actor since I first saw The Shadow all the way back in the 90s. While it may not be one of his most critically acclaimed movies of an otherwise stellar career, I still can't fault his work. I was never able to see his work on Thomas the Tank Engine as a teenager, but now I've rewatched season 5 and 6 on YouTube. He did an amazing job, for the most part. His voiceover work was engaging and energetic, so having him on board the movie as Mr. Conductor was a smart choice, since he was already involved with the franchise. Baldwin brought that same energy and passion in this movie as he did with most of his projects. Despite what people may think of some of the dialogue in the movie, you can't say he didn't keep your attention. The late, great Peter Fonda is, in my opinion, a different story. I know his character was meant to be aloof and mourning over the events of Lady and Diesel 10's encounter, but his voice was too monotone. The acting itself, through his facial expressions and movement, were spot on, but the voice almost put me to sleep at times. One particular point that I noticed it was when Lily finally returned from Sodor to Muffle Mountain, and the concern on Stone's face was there, but the voice work made it sound like he didn't even know that he had a granddaughter. I say Peter Fonda is the great Peter Fonda because he was great. You don't get 2 Academy Award nominations, one for Best Actor and one for Best Screenwriter, if you aren't good at what you do. However, this role was at the latter stage of his career, long after his influence in the counterculture movement had subsided. So, to me, that felt like a think of the paycheck job rather than something he really wanted to do. Which brings me to Mara Wilson. I don't believe that she was only doing this role for the money, as a lot of reviewers have stated. Miss Wilson, as I've mentioned previously, speaks very highly about her time on Thomas and the Magic Railroad, and if she didn't enjoy it, she wouldn't want to continuously talk about it. Miss Wilson seems to have a genuine connection with the Thomas fandom, and I would have loved to have seen her voice and engine in the TV series. Maybe they could have brought back Lady and had the events of the movie come full circle. I think the reason people thought Miss Wilson wasn't interested was because the actress herself was starting to become disillusioned by the industry. And because she was a famous child actor, and she was fantastic, audiences would look at every performance she gave under a microscope. I thought Mara was great as Lily, even though I do think her character was redundant. And I'm so glad to hear that she's performing again. Didi Conn, I would say, is in the same ballpark as Alec Baldwin in terms of this movie. She was part of Shining Time from the beginning, clearly cared about her role, and played it to perfection. Ms. Conn, like Mara Wilson, is someone who still has fond memories of her time working on this movie, and when I was watching it, not once did I ever think that her smile was an act. Ms. Conn has a lovable energy in her performance, and it drew you in, which was great to see. Michael E. Rogers, who played Junior in the movie, was fascinating to me, mainly because I had no idea he was actually a fellow Scot. The accent he had in the movie felt like it was someone trying to put on a Scottish accent, similar to the style of Donald and Douglas in the classic series. But then, when I read anything in the style of Donald and Douglas, I do put on that same accent by default, and I am Scottish. While I do feel the character was unnecessary, I can't fault his performance, even if it's the one that I find the most dated. Junior is a Scottish surfer dude with a laid-back attitude and blonde tips in his hair. Very 2000s boy band-esque. I know this was filmed in the late 90s and released in 1999, so actually he was ahead of the curve. I also felt like Junior and Lily had a really weird kind of chemistry going on in this movie. I know it was meant to be Patch and Lily we were meant to see that with, but rewatch any of Junior and Lily's scenes, and you'll notice they seem to click on screen more than Lily and Patch ever did. At one point in the movie, Lily said to Patch that she knew she could count on him, but she'd only had one conversation with Patch and very limited interaction, so to me, it felt really out of place. Speaking of Patch, do you know that Cody McMains starred in a teen comedy movie alongside Chris Evans 1 year after this movie came out? That's right, Patch and Captain America were in the same movie. I spoke earlier about how I felt Patch's character was underused, and I stand by that, because I don't think Cody McMains gave a bad performance. At the right time and development of the character, Patch would have been great, and I think they had the right actor for the job. I've not seen much of McMains on the screen since then, but I do hope that he is still making a living, doing what he loves, and working away. The Unlucky Tug mentioned in his review of all the Thomas movies that this movie nailed the feel of classic Thomas when they focused on the island of Sodor. While that would be inevitable because it was filmed during the classic era, specifically just after season 5, I think it's actually down to the fact that they shipped the entire set from Shepperton Studios off to Canada, as well as flying out several of the TV series' key staff. I know that the set suffered quite a bit of damage and became warped with the reported 113 degree heat of the studio and had to be rebuilt, especially Tidmouth Sheds. And if they hadn't brought those key members of staff out to help with the rebuild, it may not have had the same classic feel after all. I also think that's why things like the magic buffers, in my opinion, don't feel like classic Thomas. It felt like Sodor was being tampered with. That being said, the shots of Sodor were absolutely gorgeous. There are filmmakers working today with better technology that can't achieve that level of attention and care and detail. While the real world sets didn't have any relevance to my 13-year-old me because of my naivety around Shining Time Station, there is no denying that Miss Allcroft wanted to make a movie that was visually stunning in every way, and it shows in the final product. Shining Time Station, Muffle Mountain, Burnett Stone's workshop, and many more were given the same amount of love and care that the set from Shepperton Studios was also given. This could be the quickest part of my review, as I have nothing negative to say about the music. The only thing that 13-year-old me was confused about at the time was the inclusion of songs with children singing in them, as I had never listened to any songs like that in a Thomas setting before this movie. I know now how popular they were, especially after my interview with Mr. O'Donnell, and I can understand how hearing those songs in the movie would have added that extra kick that it needed. I believe that in any form of media, whether it's movies or television, it can be taken to new heights with the inclusion of a good musical score. Entertainment is an immersive experience, and music adds that bit of magic to help draw out the emotions felt by the audience. So the biggest compliment I could give the music in this movie is that when I watched it as a teenager, I genuinely thought it was Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell that composed the music for the film. I know now it was Hummy Mann, and I have to say, Mann did an excellent job. Say what you want about any other parts of this movie, but oh my goodness, Mann gets full marks from me for his musical efforts. From a directing standpoint, in my opinion, Britt Allcroft did a great job. It was very clear that Miss Allcroft picked up a trick or two from David Mitton in how some of the scenes in the movie were shot. The close-up shots of the engines, those little unique camera angles, they all screamed classic Mitton. Again, when I watched it at 13, I thought Mitton had directed the Sodor parts of the movie, because the style was imprinted all over it, and that is a real testament to Allcroft's work. The real world parts of the story were where I feel Allcroft's directing style faltered a little, but I don't blame Allcroft for that. We all know Allcroft's original script was drastically altered from the one she'd planned, with major plot points and characters either changed or cut out altogether, before and after test screenings. You can find out more information about this in the Thomas Wiki, and when you see all the things that were removed, and the inevitable reshoots that had to happen as a result of these changes, it can leave you feeling deflated. Miss Allcroft's movie got a lot of unnecessary backlash as a result of test audiences and executives who knew nothing about Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends trying to play director. Allcroft knew as much about Thomas and Friends as David Mitton, Christopher Awdry, and in my own opinion, even the Reverend Wilbur Awdry himself. Allcroft should have been allowed to release the movie as it was originally intended and not the watered down corporate compromise that many fans feel it became. The fact that Thomas and the Magic Railroad is so divisive amongst fans is why overall, I think this is a good movie. Not just a good Thomas movie, but a good movie. Yes, there's an overcomplicated plot. Yes, there were characters cut out we would have liked to have seen. Yes, there was characters left in the movie that didn't need to be there. And the critical reception at the time definitely affected the series going forward, as we'll get into in other review videos. However, the fact that Britt Allcroft did what she was able to do with this movie, after all of the pressure put on her with edits, reshoots, voice actor changes, and so much more, shows that she is a fantastic director. Because here we are all these decades later still talking about it. With all the meddling from behind the scenes, people could make a plethora of documentaries about this movie. The fans, who create such astounding replicas of the engines, sets and props, could easily take Allcroft's original movie idea and create it to a professional standard. I know with the way the franchise is gone that might never happen, but hey, a man can dream, can't he? Until that day comes, at least we have this movie. A time capsule that allows us to revisit classic Thomas and Shining Time Station in one fell swoop. Thomas and the Magic Railroad might not have had the success everyone was expecting, but if it was that bad, nothing else would have been made after this. We get 19 more seasons and 13 movies after Thomas and the Magic Railroad was made. That's not bad for a supposedly bad movie. 13-year-old me never thought he would see a Thomas movie in his lifetime. But he did. And I'm proud of the legacy Thomas and the Magic Railroad has left on us, regardless of any negatives. Even taking all of that away, this will always be the first Thomas and Friends movie, the only one to be set in the classic era, and a reminder that if you work hard, your dreams can come true. Thomas and the Magic Railroad may have not been Allcroft's original vision, but she got to do something millions of fans wished that we could do. Make a classic era Thomas movie.